So we have been in this sermon series reading through Paul's letter to the church in Rome, and we are rapidly approaching the end. The letter has taken a turn. So a quick review might be in order. The problem, says Paul, is that we have labored under the powers of sin and death and everything that makes life less. And we have tried. We've tried to get out from under those powers. We have made laws and rules. We have written manifestos and statements of faith. We have said, if we do these things and don't do these things, we will be okay. But the powers of sin and death and everything that makes life less know how to twist the laws and rules and manifestos and statements. They know how to find the loopholes and convince us to follow the loopholes. And it turns out that there is a gulf between being law-abiding and being righteous. It turns out that there is a chasm between following the rules and getting out from under the powers of sin and death and everything that makes life less. So Paul says, more or less, stop worrying about the rules. Have faith in God, in the God who has promised good to those who love him. Have faith that God is faithful. Trust that God is trustworthy. Live in God's promise. And if you can't do that, have faith in those who have had faith. Jewish people are redeemed for the sake of their ancestor Abraham, who had faith and whose faith was reckoned to him as righteousness, to whom a promise was made. Everyone else is redeemed for the sake of Christ, who had faith in God, even though that led to the cross and the tomb, who was resurrected, who now rules over all creation with mercy. So step into that. And now, Paul is turning to how do we live once we have stepped into that? What does a life of faith, what does a life of redemption, what does a life of freedom, what does a new life look like? And he lists these things. Hold fast to what is good, reject what is evil. Love each other, all of those sorts of things, and now we hit the problem, which is that I want to tell you to do these things. But I know that if we focus on this list of virtues that Paul has given to us, we will be tempted to think that displaying the virtues is what redeems us, is what restores us, is what frees us. There is always that temptation to think that being Christian, that following Christ is about being good. And that if I can just be good enough, well, then I will get my reward. And I get that temptation. It's the same temptation that we saw at the very beginning of Romans, when Paul listed to his audience all the things not to do, all of the vices to avoid, and his audience nodded along, and then he had to say, well, why do you keep doing these things if you know they're wrong? Why do we fail to do the things that we know are right? And here we're caught up in the same thing. Here we are caught up in the same idea. If avoiding the wrong cannot save me. Doing the right also cannot save me. What I do is not what redeems me. Christ redeems me. Through, and let me be honest about this, absolutely no merit of my own whatsoever. Simply out of love and mercy for creation. So how should we treat? How should we treat a list of virtues? A list of things that we really should do. A list of things that would make the world better if we did them. On the one hand, if I am called by God to have faith in God, to trust God, to believe in God's mercy, to believe in God's abundance, to live in that faith, it is useful to have a measure of that faith. To have some idea of what my life should look like if I'm really doing that. Because one of the things that the powers of sin and death and everything that makes life less can do is try to convince us that we are being faithful to God when we are in fact being faithful to something else. When we are in fact turning towards something else. We see this in plenty of places. We can believe that we are having faith in God when we are having faith in a political ideology or an economic system or a set of rules that look good. So how do we know if our faith is in God? Well, if our faith is in God, we should see ourselves displaying some of these virtues. Maybe not all of them, and maybe not all the time, and maybe not to their fullest extent, but at least some, and a little bit more than we used to. So on the one hand, this list can serve as a kind of barometer, a kind of how am I doing? If I am being faithful, I should see these signs of new life in me. And if I'm not seeing them, well, then maybe I need to look at where I am really putting my faith. Maybe I should look at where I am really putting my trust. On the other hand, I am a big proponent of fake it till you make it. Some of you might be familiar with the French philosopher Blaise Pascal. He is known best of all for this thing called Pascal's wager. If you've ever taken a philosophy class, you might have heard it. If you've hung out online enough, you might have seen it. The idea is you've got to trust in something, right? You've got to put your faith somewhere, right? And you can put your faith in God or not. But if you put your faith in God, and God is real and God is true, you get everything. If you put your faith in God and God is not real, is not true, what do you really lose? If you don't put your faith in God and God is not real, God is not true, no biggie. But if you don't put your faith in God and God is real, God is true, you lose everything. So, says Pascal, put your faith in God. I know that's a lot. It's not the point right now. The point is that he follows that up in an incredibly clever way because he's talking to someone. He's saying, here's the wager you have to take. And what if the person comes back and says, but I still can't believe. I can't actually put my faith there. It's too hard. I'm not built for it. And Pascal says, pretend? Do the things you would do if you were faithful? And maybe faith will start to show up. Maybe if I force myself to go out and love people, I will find myself becoming more loving. Maybe if I share what I have with others, I will find myself becoming more generous. Maybe if I love my enemies and do good for those who hurt me, I will find myself becoming more empathetic and sympathetic and caring and open. If I hold fast to what I know is good, even if I'm a little sketchy on my ability to hold fast, maybe I will get a better grip on good things. This list has these two possibilities, and any list of any virtues has these two possibilities. If my faith is where it should be, I should see these signs of new life. And if I live as though I have faith, if I live according to these signs of new life, maybe I will find my faith growing. Maybe I will find it welling up inside of me. If I can pretend to trust God hard enough, maybe I will find myself trusting God. I know that's a strange thing to say. I know this is a strange idea because, again, I want to tell you to do good things. Go out and do good things. But I also don't want you to be fooled. I don't want you to be tricked. I don't want you to be trapped in the idea that if I can find the good things to do, that by itself will make everything okay. Because the truth is, any list like this is woefully incomplete. There are a host of good things that we could do that no one's going to write down. That even Paul isn't going to write down. And we are going to be left wondering whether we have done enough. At its worst, we can end up in that trap of scrupulosity, that constant self-examination, that constant self-condemnation. I could have been better. Or we can end up inflating our own egos. I have done so well. And so I am telling you this, and we'll talk more about this next week, but I am telling you this. I'm telling you what Paul has been saying. Don't worry about the rules. Don't make more rules. Don't set up more laws. Don't say, if I don't do this and do this, then I am fine. Instead, have faith in God. Trust God. Listen for God. Follow where God calls you, wherever that might be. And check back. Is this leading to more good, to more love, to more care in the world? If it is, then we are following God. If it is not, then we need to adjust our course. And when we get off course, we look for the signposts. Those things that we can do that we know add good to the world, to lead us back to God. This constant interplay between simply trusting God and looking for those things that lead us to God. It is work, I know. It is hard, I know. It is uncertain, I know. But when we get into that, when we can find those signs of new life within us, when we can look for those signs of new life around us, well, then we can find ourselves stepping into God's reign of love, responding to God's mercy for us, and living the lives that God calls us to lead. Thanks be to God.